us a bit about why Donald Trump is so popular with evangelicals, even over Ron DeSantis and other candidates? What explains his appeal to it?
Well, as I said during the speech, he signed more executive orders for religious freedom than anybody else. He cares deeply about it. And a lot of people that take the coarseness of his language and say that can't possibly be something that would be consistent with the biblical movement. But the thing that I want to keep emphasizing, you have to look at the actions. You have to look at what was done, what the effect of those policies were on people's lives. That's very consistent with the evangelical movement. And then you look at things like the fact that he's the only president that ever went to the March for Life and has been extremely supportive of preserving life and from the wounds of the church.
Dr. Carson, do you think Donald Trump should be here giving his message himself?
Well, as you know, he's got some legal things that have kind of tied up. So I think it's very important that we do continue to put his message out, even though he's got a number of people who are trying to do everything they possibly can to interfere with it.
Dr. Carson, has Donald Trump asked you to be his VP candidate?
I think all the talk about VP is a distraction. And the important thing is for us to get the kind of leadership in place that we need, and then we'll go to all the other things.
Dr. Carson, 2 questions if you don't mind. The first, Chris Christie dropped out earlier today. You ran alongside him in 2016. Just any comment about that?
Well, I am glad to see the field kind of rolling down a little bit. That's important as we get to a place where people can concentrate on fewer people, they can concentrate more on the issues that those people are pushing. So it's good in that sense. I have no problem with the fact that other people are wrong. But one of the things that's very important is at this juncture in our history, we need to have proven leadership and not maybe good leadership, maybe not good leadership. So that's the reason that I'm pushing for Donald Trump.
And towards the end of your remarks, you talked about how more Black people and Latinos seem to be supporting Republicans. Do you think more Republican candidates should be making an effort to speak directly with those communities?
Oh, without question. I advocate for that very strongly. I think they will find a tremendous resonance because, particularly in the Black community, there are a lot of people who have conservative thinking and traditional values. And they're just sort of dragged along with everybody else. And I think a lot of those people are starting to say, wait a minute, how is this helping me? How is this helping my community? Look at what's going on in Chicago right now, bringing all the immigrants. And I have great sympathy for immigration, no question about it. But I think there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. But it's impacting negatively the people in that community. And our leadership has to recognize that we can't just do stuff that's politically expedient. We've got to think about what's good for all the people.
Thank you for doing this, Dr. Carson. You mentioned during the speech earlier that you admit that President Trump said some weird things. What are some of the things that he said that you found weird?
That I find what?
That you found weird that he said?
I don't want to go into that, but everybody knows that sometimes the language can be a little coarse. And that's why I emphasize, it's not what a person says, it's what a person does that is so vitally important. And on the other side, when you have people who have flowery speech and make all kinds of promises and talk about bringing people together, but their actions don't do that, that's something that we need to be able to analyze with our brains and make the right decisions.
Do you think his language hurts his favorability or popularity among certain voters?
Well, it does with some people, but that's why I ask people, Would you rather have somebody whose language is somewhat offensive, but whose policies are very helpful, or somebody whose policies are destructive, but whose language you love?
Dr. Carson, what has been like something you found surprising as you've been in Iowa? Like, what has been a big takeaway as you've been talking to precinct captains, voters, speaking to folks in Iowa?
Well, that people are full of common sense, but sometimes people have to be encouraged in terms of courage, because we're in a society now where a lot of people don't necessarily want to be canceled or have people say bad things about them. But at this stage of the game, what's much more important is that we grasp those values that made this into a great country, and we understand what those are, and we stick with those. Doesn't mean that we have to be mean to people. I don't think we have to be mean to LGBT people, but we can't reform our whole way of doing things on the basis of a few aberrations. We can respect them, we can let them do what they want to do, but they don't get to change everything for everybody else.
What can the Republican Party do better when it comes to talking about race? I think you've articulated some of the issues in very precise terms.
Well, I think the Republican Party would be smart to talk about their history with race and how, the Republican Party was formed as an abolitionist party. And they were the ones who did so much to help end slavery and to provide rights for the freedmen and to push for civil rights movement. They don't talk about that. So as a result, the Democrats have kind of seized on it and saying, we're actually the ones who did all that. And they're not. They're the ones who actually created the problem. But I wish the Republican Party would talk a little bit more about their history and make a more concerted effort. They are starting to do that, to go into these communities. And, they need to make those communities compete for their vote, and not just automatically go over to the other side.
Dr. Carson, would you want to serve in a second Trump administration?
I love what I'm doing right now with the American Cornerstone Institute, trying to refocus people on those cornerstone principles that made us into a great nation. But I will always be helping in one way or another.
You mentioned how you want to focus on Donald Trump's policies. One of the ways he stood out from other candidates is he's been willing to be more lenient on abortion policy. He said that there should not be a role for the federal government, rather it should be states stay at the states. I'm wondering, as someone who has been, at a faith-based event, how do you receive that version of Donald Trump's policy, and why hasn't that hurt him with the evangelical voters?
Well, I think a lot of people understand that when it comes to issues like abortion, we should concentrate more on conversion than on coercion. Conversion, not coercion, because what that does is it just creates more of a gap between people. And a lot more young people are pro-life, as you probably noticed, because they've grown up at a time when we can actually see what's in our mothers. So, at 6 or 8 weeks, we can see the little eye buds and the little ear buds and the fingers and the toes and the heart's movement. It gets really hard to say that that's not living.
So that's about Trump. That's all we got.
Could you just explain what conversion, not coercion, means?
Yeah. Thank you.
That means talking to people, presenting the evidence to them, and helping them to see that life is important, that life is important, rather than saying, you absolutely can't do this or that.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your time.